The courtroom fell silent as the judge, an older black man with a history of breaking barriers, adjusted his glasses. On one side of the room, a young, wealthy, and overly confident woman sat, her eyes filled with disdain as she glanced at him, barely hiding her arrogance. She had always been used to getting away with anything, her family's money and connections shielding her from consequences. But today, something would change. The woman smirked as her lawyer stood, making claims that sounded more like a joke than a defense. She couldn't fathom that this man, this judge, could ever be a challenge. Little did she know, the man sitting on that bench had seen it all. Every sneer, every underestimation, every injustice. And this time, he wasn't just going to let it slide. The courtroom watched in anticipation, sensing that something was about to unfold. The judge's calm voice broke through the tension, delivering a sentence that left the room breathless. It wasn't just a verdict, it was a statement. What came next would shock everyone, and it would make her regret ever underestimating him. This was no ordinary court case. This was a battle for respect, for justice, and for the power that comes from the most unexpected places. Before we jump into today's story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you love powerful stories of justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let's get started. She walked into the courtroom with the air of someone who owned the world, her heels clicking with each confident step, her designer clothes as immaculate as her sense of entitlement. Her name was Emily Stanton, a socialite, the daughter of one of the city's wealthiest families. To her, the courtroom was just another place to flaunt her power, another game she could play and win. She barely noticed the faces around her, each of them looking at her with varying degrees of judgment, but none with the slightest hint of surprise. Emily had never faced consequences. She was used to getting what she wanted, whether it was through charm, influence, or, if needed, her father's money. When she glanced at the judge, she only saw a man with gray hair and an old-fashioned suit, hardly the type to pose any real threat. Her gaze flicked over him with barely a second thought, dismissing him entirely. But what Emily didn't know, what no one in that room realized, was that the judge sitting across from her had a history of his own, a history of perseverance, of overcoming obstacles that would break most people. He wasn't just a figure in a robe. He was someone who had spent his life defying expectations, proving that power and justice were not things you could buy. And today, he wasn't just going to sit back and let her think she could take this courtroom lightly. The room waited, as if holding its collective breath, knowing that the tension was rising, about to explode into something no one could predict. The judge leaned forward, his gaze locking with hers, and the challenge was unmistakable. Emily leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, as her lawyer spoke with all the arrogance of someone who believed the law was a mere formality. "Your Honor, we request leniency for my client. She's young, impressionable, and this incident was a mere accident. No one was seriously harmed," the lawyer said, his voice smooth, rehearsed, like a broken record. Emily smirked, her fingers idly tracing the edge of her expensive handbag. She didn't care about the rules or the people around her. She cared about getting out of here, untouched. The judge's eyes remained fixed on her, his face unreadable. The room seemed to hold its breath as he let the silence stretch on, waiting. Emily shifted uncomfortably, the quiet growing thick with something unspoken. The judge wasn't buying it. This wasn't just about a minor mistake. This wasn't just about some harmless slip-up. Emily had humiliated someone in front of a courtroom, used her wealth and privilege to belittle a person of color, a person who had spent years fighting through the same biases and obstacles that Emily took for granted. To Emily, the law was a tool to be bent, to be manipulated for her own benefit. But to the judge, the law was a living, breathing entity, one that demanded respect, one that stood for something much greater than the likes of Emily Stanton. "Miss Stanton," the judge finally spoke, his voice calm yet firm, Your behavior in this courtroom has shown a deep disregard for the principles of justice, fairness, and respect for others. This goes far beyond the incident in question. This is about something much deeper, something you clearly have not yet understood." Emily's face flushed with a mixture of annoyance and confusion. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected someone like him to stand up to her. She raised an eyebrow, the arrogance still present, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes now. The judge paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in before leaning forward, the tension palpable. "Let me make this clear," he continued, his voice unyielding. "You will face the consequences of your actions, and they will be more than you bargained for." Emily's eyes narrowed, her mind racing to find some way to regain control of the situation. She had always been able to charm her way out of anything, to manipulate people into seeing things her way. But this time, it was different. The judge wasn't intimidated by her wealth, her status, or her pretty smile. And for the first time, she felt a hint of fear creeping in. As the judge looked down at his papers, his expression softened slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though the weight of his decision was not lost on him. But there was no hesitation in his eyes. He had made up his mind. And Emily, for all her confidence, had no idea what was coming next. The judge wasn't just any judge. His name had become synonymous with fairness, with integrity. He wasn't just appointed because of his knowledge of the law. He had earned his place through years of fighting against a system that tried to keep him out, that tried to shut him down. He had been a trailblazer in a world where people like him were often overlooked, dismissed, or worse, undermined. The very reason he was here today, sitting on that bench, was because of everything he had fought through: racism, bias, systemic injustice. And now, Emily was going to see just how much he had truly overcome. The courtroom waited, holding its breath as the judge stood, the soft rustle of his robes echoing through the room. Emily barely registered it, too caught up in the disbelief that anyone would dare stand up to her. The judge turned toward the crowd, his voice now carrying a depth of authority that sent a chill through the room. "I've spent my life seeing beyond the surface," he said, "and what I see in you is more than you realize." As the judge's words echoed in the courtroom, Emily's mind spun with confusion. What did he mean, seeing beyond the surface? Was this some kind of twisted test? She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. She wanted to fight back, to speak up, but something about the way the judge was looking at her made her hesitate. He wasn't speaking to her as a rich, privileged young woman. He was speaking to her as if he could see right through her, through everything she had ever used to hide her insecurities, her flaws, her lies. The room buzzed with whispers as the onlookers began to realize that this wasn't just another court case. This was something bigger. The tension was palpable, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The judge's eyes never left Emily, as if waiting for her to understand something she hadn't yet grasped. Behind the calm exterior of this man, behind his stern expression, was something far deeper. The people who had walked through his courtroom before had learned this the hard way. No one who underestimated him ever left unchanged. Emily's instinct was to push back, to fight against the rising tide of uncertainty, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than she had imagined. This wasn't just about the law anymore. The judge's voice broke the silence, calm yet cutting, as he began to recount details from the investigation, pieces of information that Emily hadn't expected anyone to uncover. The whispers had turned to silence, and in that moment, Emily realized that the walls around her were closing in. "You thought you could hide the truth behind your family's name, behind your wealth," the judge continued, his voice unwavering. "But I've seen your kind before, and the truth is always revealed, no matter how hard you try to bury it." The courtroom was dead silent now, every eye fixed on the judge as he reached for the thick file in front of him. Emily's heart hammered in her chest, her palms sweating. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, and she desperately tried to grasp control, but it was slipping from her fingers faster than she could catch it. She had never felt so exposed, so small. The judge opened the file, his fingers skimming through the pages with practiced ease. Emily's mind raced, trying to process what was happening, what he was about to reveal. It couldn't be possible. No one knew about the things she had done, the secrets she had kept hidden. But the look in the judge's eyes, there was no doubt. He had uncovered everything. "Miss Stanton," he said, his voice colder now, harder. "I've seen people like you, people who think they can skate through life with their money, their privilege, and their arrogance. But the truth always has a way of catching up." He paused, letting the words sink in, his gaze never leaving her face. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the bombshell that would change everything. Emily's stomach twisted with dread, her world slowly crumbling around her as the judge finally dropped the file onto the table with a soft thud. "The truth is," the judge continued, "you've been using your position to destroy people, to take away what others rightfully earned. Your actions have hurt more people than you can imagine, and today you will face the consequences, not as the daughter of your father's wealth, but as a person who has wronged the law, wronged the people, and wronged the very idea of justice." Emily's face drained of color. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. The judge stood tall, his voice ringing with an unshakable authority as he delivered the final blow. "The sentence is clear. Your privilege will no longer protect you. This is your reckoning." The room was thick with silence, a quiet that seemed to stretch on forever as Emily sat frozen, her world crashing down around her. The judge's words hung in the air, unyielding and final, like a verdict on everything she had ever taken for granted. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. She wasn't the one holding the power. It was someone else's turn now. As the bailiff moved forward to escort her out, Emily's mind raced, the weight of her actions sinking in. She had always thought that money could shield her, that her status could insulate her from the consequences of her choices. But today, she learned the hard way that there were some things even money couldn't buy: integrity, respect, and justice. The judge watched her go, his face still calm, his eyes betraying nothing of the years of struggle, the quiet battles fought in the shadows. He had spent a lifetime learning that true power wasn't in wealth, wasn't in social standing. It was in the quiet, steady pursuit of what was right. And today, Emily Stanton had learned that lesson. Perhaps too late, but learned nonetheless. As the courtroom emptied, a few people lingered, whispering amongst themselves. They were witnessing something rare, a moment where justice was not about money or connections, but about something far more powerful: the truth. And in that moment, they understood what the judge had known all along. Justice wasn't just a concept, it was a force, one that could be wielded by anyone, no matter their background. And the moral of the story was simple, but profound. No one is untouchable. The truth will always come to light, and no amount of privilege can shield you from the consequences of your actions. Justice may be delayed, but it will always find its way, because in the end, integrity and fairness are the greatest forces in any battle. Thank you for watching. Maya's story reminds us that standing up for what's right can create lasting change. Whether it's overcoming adversity or challenging injustice, your voice matters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts on the story. Let's keep this conversation going. And remember, sharing these stories helps spread the message of justice and fairness, one act of courage at a time. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.